Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sarmad, and we're the co-founders of LastMile AI, and this is our LM podcast.
This podcast is to talk about news and updates in the AI world, where we'll give you our opinions and talk with different experts in the AI space to break down what's happening in the AI industry.
And in today's episode, our inaugural one, we're going to talk about Deepseek, about model context protocol, about agents, and a whole bunch in between. And so stay tuned. All right. Happy Friday, Andrew.
Happy Friday.
How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, it's a busy day, gloomy weather.
Yes. Yeah. We're recording our conversation for the whole world to see. So. But we do this often, right?
Yeah,
so
we do this often.
Every day, many times a day.
Just never recorded.
Never recorded. So we'll see what we talk about. But I'm doing well as well. Let's get started. So
maybe we can kick things off with, I think there's a lot of things happening in the AI world. Curious what's top of mind for you?
Oh, there's so many things. One is, Deepseek came out as a model in the last week or so, R1, and I think wiped off hundreds of billions of dollars from some companies' market caps. We've played with it, downloaded it. It's pretty phenomenal. You have any thoughts on that?
It's interesting. I mean, it's now pointing a little bit to is building a foundation model that is highest caliber limited to the top 1 to 3 AI companies? And will enterprises want to build their own, ChatGPT style model and what happens with that?
Models from scratch?
Yeah, because it's always, we work with a lot of enterprises, and all of them are asking which model should we use, which model provider, and they're signing these massive contracts with the largest model providers to get rights to use their model. What happens when they can, for a fraction of the cost, actually have their own model like that? And that's within the realm of possibility. How does that really change the dynamic of things? I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Like, if any of the customers we work with, they're like, do I pay, 8-figure contract, or do I, for 7 figures, also get it into my company and we get unlimited usage? Is that better? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think is going to happen?
I mean, we've talked to so many customers, and one of the first things that everybody talks about as their North Star is fine-tuning, their own models with their own data. So I think there's definitely a need for it, or a demand for it. But it's always been this abstract thing that people are like, we'll get to it, once we actually productionize something with the base API mediated AI models. And so one of the questions I have actually, even before that, is what do you think of the hype cycle with all of this going on? What is the ROI on these AI applications? Because that kind of is a precursor and prerequisite to someone deciding if they should train their own model.
Yeah, I mean, we started the company 2 years ago, and we had that intuition as we were walking through the park that this is going to change the landscape in many different ways. And the belief, we still really strongly know that this will change everything. Now the question is, how fast? That's the thing that everyone's top of mind, which is it going to change the world the next year, next 3 years, next 10 years, right? And the folks who are more cautious about hype cycles are like the ones who keep pointing to like self-driving cars, where they're like, I'm not in a self-driving car. Like, what's happening?
Unless
Someone told me
SF
that.
Now.
Unless you're an SF. But even then, it's like isolated to certain parts of SF. And you need like a private invite from Waymo to use it. And so it's not the world that everyone imagined, 5 years ago?
Maybe even 10 years ago, when it just seemed just around the corner.
Yeah, and everyone's like, we're just gonna, I remember talking to my wife, and she was like, why do I need to learn how to drive? We're gonna be in self-driving cars. And now 10 years later, it's like, I wonder how hard is that driver's test? And so there's one side of it, which is the long tail of this tech is so long. And then the other side of it is innovation's happening so fast that it feels like the rate at which this will be practical and drive a lot of innovation and ROI seems to be just a few yards away.
Yeah.
And it's a really difficult thing to measure. I don't know. We started off saying that the last mile is the hardest.
Yeah.
And it is hardest part, maybe even harder than what we had imagined. I'm curious.
Everybody's in that last mile, right?
Yeah.
Like that's where, and nobody's really fully reached it. And so we've seen, I think a lot of my take on the hype cycle in general is every couple of months there's this new it thing in AI that everybody's talking about. You know, it was RAG. Everybody when we first started raising was asking about vector databases. What vector DBs are you using? And now that's a commoditized thing. And so then people started talking about RAG and RAG pipelines. Then I think there was graph RAG that's come out. There's contextual retrieval. There's all sorts of like really interesting ideas around information retrieval, which we know is a big problem that everybody's trying to solve. And now as models are getting better and are able to reason and there's inference time, compute happening and more things are shifting into the model inference layer, people are talking about agents because now they can see, okay, I can kind of trust these models, but I don't know, it's still very vibes check based on is it working, is it not? And so I still think all of that is a symptom of the last mile problems of the space right now. And at least I don't see the ROI yet, but I think I still see so much demand because everybody knows this is a game-changing thing. We're able to have these machines that are able to reason in really sophisticated ways. And there's a lot of back office work and workflows and tasks and things that we can kind of rid ourselves as humans to do better things with our time. And so I think there's a lot of promise for that. But I'm curious, how do you see the next, 6 months progressing? I find it hard to even predict a few months down the line, a quarter down the line, but what are your takes on how the next 6 months to a year is going to shape up?
I think if we take one step back, I'm curious if you can, for listeners, define what is an agent, which is maybe the hardest question
I don't even
in
like
the generative
the
AI space
agent.
because it's I think a mixture and a fluctuating terminology as time went on. But I would love to get the definition of an agent because agents are everywhere and everyone's talking about it. But it seems like we don't have that formal definition yet. So what is an agent?
Oh man. So I'll preface this by saying I don't personally like the term agent because it evokes, a fully autonomous kind of system that's kind of acting completely independently of a human in the loop. But the way I think about it is basically an AI model that has access to the world around it, which is tools, data, resources, prompts, even other humans, and is able to run maybe in a loop. So it might be as simple as running in a for loop, and we've called it something fancy like an agent, but it's able to basically operate with information, with data, with tools, in a semi-autonomous way. I think that's what I think of as an agent. And then there are different implementations of it. So there's the most advanced case where you basically give an objective to an AI system and then it generates code for you. And code is then you can do anything. And so that's one, and Hugging Face has this new library called Small Agents that's basically made that decision of generating code and running it in a sandbox, and that's their simplest definition of agent. But they went full autonomous at that point, super flexible. To me, that's level 5 self-driving. Right? Fully autonomous, and you trust it; it'll work. But then there are shades of that in between, where the simplest one would be things like RAG pipelines, where you've kind of encoded how you're going to chunk data and how you're going to retrieve it as rules, but you're still letting an AI model at the end retrieve things and generate stuff. So it's a little bit more fixed. I still think people consider retrieval as part of an agentic workflow. So it's very confusing because that's on one end, and then you have complete autonomy with code execution on the other. I actually think the most reliable place to be for agents today is in the middle, where you give access to tools, and so there's a well-defined APIs that an agent can call. You also give it access to data, and that can be well-defined, like data warehouses that it can access. And then you let the model kind of reason over how to interact with those in a way it chooses to accomplish a task. And so, we can talk more about it, but that's at a high level my definition of agents.
No, I think it's useful to have that, because I think nowadays everything looks like an agent for everybody in the AI space, right? It's you look at any microservice, you look at any tool out there, you look at any piece of data, and you're like, I can see how that becomes an agent.
Right.
And that confuses folks, because I think to some sense, if everything's an agent, where do you draw the lines? What should an agent be able to do, and what is that contract for what is the atomic unit of an agent, which is quite useful if you have a reasoning model that needs to break down into a subset of tasks, almost a workflow, for agents to be orchestrated to conduct some type of job to be done. And so now I'm curious, you've released the MCP agent framework, and it's a more structured way to identify what is that contract of what an agent should have. So I'm curious to get your take. What is the contract for what is a MVP or basic atom of an agent?
And I guess, so long answer, but the precursor to this is, I think so far, because everything's moving so fast, the AI developer space is really fragmented, right? There's every developer API for a model, depending on the model provider, has a different way of attaching tools to a model, and different capabilities that these models expose. And then there are tons of frameworks as well that are kind of like trying to encode these behaviors and rules in ways that developers can use quickly. And so there is precedent for solving this, which is protocols. SMTP is an email protocol, and so like every client, whether you're using Outlook, Gmail, whatnot, implements a protocol, and you can attach your Outlook email to your Apple Mail client,
and
it
just works.
Just works. Nobody thinks about it anymore, right? Like it's a solved problem thanks to a protocol. We both worked at Microsoft. I was working on developer tools, and I worked on language server protocol, which helps standardize how IDEs expose language features to developers. And before this, and it's like only a few years ago, but nobody remembers this now, Atom, Sublime, Notepad++, VS Code, Visual Studio, they all had like their own way of providing basic things like autocomplete. And so if you were like trying to build a Python language server, you had to support all these clients in different ways. And when Language Server Protocol came out, it defined the standard way of exposing language features. And every client that adopted it immediately benefited from the same language server implementation. And so the Python language server, for example, can just focus on building a really solid single implementation for all clients. And so I think we need something like that in the AI space. I think it's time, and so Model Context Protocol came out recently. Anthropic created it, but it's model agnostic, which is really important. And it basically defines this interface that services can implement that let AI systems interact with them. And so think of like Gmail or Calendar or Jira or any kind of like SaaS offering, and how do you interact with it? You interact with it. There's sometimes a developer API, it's all inconsistent, but basically what MCP does is it lets you define an interface for that service so that you can expose those services as tools or resources to AI models. And if you do this in a standardized way, then it's like magical, because then we can imagine every service that we use today as humans being accessible to AI through this protocol. And that makes it really powerful because then you can orchestrate very complex kind of interactions across these services using agents and do it in a standardized way instead of doing it one-off and like, this framework does it this way, this model provider handles it this different way. A protocol just like flattens that completely. And so what I did during my Christmas break, as you know, a few all-nighters later, is built a very simple kind of like protocol layer on top of MCP that lets you orchestrate these MCP servers as agents into agents. And so all you do is you say like, this agent has access to these servers, and that might be like, let's say you're building a calendar assistant. I'm very passionate about optimizing that, and so you can give it access to like Gmail, Google Calendar, and say these are the only servers you have access to, and then here's a task, and it will then like use a model to invoke the tools that it needs from those servers to accomplish your task. And then MCP agent also implements a few basic kind of workflows that make it easy for a model to accomplish its tasks. And these are like fairly simple, like, you might want to route, which is determine what the intent is of a user and then route to the right agent. Or you might want to evaluate and optimize, where you kind of see you have two AI agents that are working in concert, where one is creating a proposal and the other is evaluating that proposal and saying, is this a good answer to your original objective or not? Which is really good for planners, where you want a high quality plan before you fan things out. So it has a few of those kind of basic primitives, and then it builds on a standard protocol, which nobody else kind of does yet. And so I think it's going to be, MCP in general is going to be a game changer for the developer community. But it also brings to question something that I know we've been spending a lot of time on, which is evaluation. Like these systems are getting increasingly more complex. And then also, there are reasoning models, there are smaller language models involved in the flow. How do you make sense of that as a developer? How do you like systematically determine if your application is working well or not?
Yeah, I remember how long was it? Maybe somewhere between 3 to 6 months ago, you shared AI compound systems, right? I think the Databricks folks coined that term, and it's talking about a novel phenomenon where when you're interacting with ChatGPT or other systems, it's no longer that singular model. It's an orchestration of both infrastructure and multiple models to give you a seamless experience. And as we're seeing more of this, and as the complexity of these systems grow, we're seeing more of a need of how do you introduce whatever the concept is of unit tests and end-to-end tests, right? Where it feels like the system is getting complex enough that just because you know that the final result testing hasn't come out to what you're expecting doesn't mean it's easy to isolate where something went wrong. Right? So let's say you have a system that has like O1, some type of reward model at the end, it's regressed, the end-to-end performance is worse. How do you even isolate where the issue is happening? Or an agentic system where, let's say there's some data corruption that happens in this, let's say 30-step flow. Where did it go wrong, right? And now the question is, how do you introduce these unit tests? And it seems like there's multiple different flavors. We see in agent patterns and best practices, someone's like, add in a supervisor agent. That supervisor agent just feels like an evaluation where it's asking an agent to evaluate if the quality is good enough and retry if not. There's adaptive RAG, which is now using another agent to rerun based off of some metric on whether you should rerun prompts, rerun another agent. And then there's also the check of using a web search, scrape web data, use an agent to build some content generation, compare, does it align with the web data? If not, regenerate. And so I think evaluations become much more prominent, even more so than what we've seen, and where people and customers are using our products, which is end-to-end evaluation. Now it's more of, how do we introduce these evaluations at unit tests, and how do we get a a bird's eye view of how the system is operating, as well as very granular view, because there's concern that if the system is broken somewhere, that we don't know where it's broken, and we're also concerned that we don't have full checks and visibility into the system, right? And so we see a similar, you've loved kind of the term of test-driven development and how that applies to this, and I do see that we're headed toward that trend where the systems are so complex now. You have to introduce more unit tests, integration tests into the flow, or else it's going to become unwieldy. And it's become so unwieldy that you're paying a lot of operation costs. And you also can't even deploy in production because you don't know what's out there. One question I have for you, and it popped up into my mind as we were talking about the MCP protocol, is a lot of these industry standards for, it was there with web development, JavaScript. There's some committee that comes in, and they say this is the industry software standard for X, Y, and Z. And they do it with a purpose to unify things because the benefit broadly across the ecosystem of tech will benefit for it. As well as they will also have the benefit of kind of a flourishing community because people can build off of this standard. I'm curious with MCP, what's the path like for it to become a standard, right? Because there is no current standard yet. And based off of your research and your expertise, MCP has the most promise. But how does it become the standard? Does Anthropic and other companies create a community similar to let's say PyTorch and the Linux Foundation? Does it have some type of does the community just need to back an open source project until it becomes the most popular? What is that path like to become the industry standard?
It's a good question, and I think time will tell is the short answer. We have some shared communities, like AI Alliance is one of them. By virtue of being open source, Llama has a huge open source kind of community on top of that. And I think so, and just like logistically, if you look at Model Context Protocol, its repo is not under Anthropic's organization on GitHub. It has its own thing. So I think they have that vision of having it be kind of this open shared protocol. In general, the way I think about protocols is they're similar to religions, and also they're valuable only if people actually use them. Otherwise, they don't have value because it's a very low level kind of construct. And also they have network effects. So the flip side is, if nobody uses them, then they're not very useful. But if enough people start using it, then they do create that flywheel. But it's a two-sided marketplace problem because on the one hand, you need the server developers, like people who want to expose their services to this protocol, and then on the other hand, you want app developers to actually use those servers and services. And so the developers of those services are only going to create more servers if developers want to build apps on this, and developers are only going to want to build apps on it if there's enough kind of implementations of this protocol. So breaking that logjam does require collaboration and cooperation across the industry. The worst thing to happen is like competing protocols, and then you're like, okay, which one should I pick? So we'll see how this goes. It is first to market in this way, so it has a very good shot at becoming a standard. But I really do think we just need some kind of standard for this, and it needs to go deeper as well. You pointed out evals, in a systematic way. I think you were talking about like root cause analysis and both end-to-end evaluation, but also intermediate step evaluation, so you can kind of understand where in these compound systems things are working and not working, because compound systems have compounding errors as well. And so I'm curious, what are kind of like core pieces that beyond just giving access to tools or streaming support or the basics that you think an AI protocol needs for developers today?
Oh wow, okay, that's a big topic. So Sarmad knows that I am not a big fan of DAGs, but I do think there's a lot of similarities with any type of workflow orchestration, which is if you think of each node as an agent, and you start thinking about how these agents can either trigger other agents, it can fork things, it can do retries, it can do loops. You start thinking about the primitives of a workflow.
Yeah.
And workflows have retry policies if something fails. It has checks to see if intermediate outputs through the steps are correct. It has end-to-end checks to make sure that the end-to-end system works. It has all of the core operational logic for if I were to break down an agentic system into a finite state machine or some type of diagram, can I actually diagram it out and outline whether the logic makes sense or not? And some part of that people might say as well, isn't that the orchestrator's job, where the orchestrator will break down the tasks and then start assigning to agents to conduct it? But how do you make sure that that game plan and that agent flow is correct? That seems to be the most prominent things that come to mind, the core components. And I think the thing that most people aren't talking about, my more radical take, is once the contract is standardized and the atomic units of what an agent is standardized, I think that logic for how you break it into some agent workflow, whether real-time or offline, that data is going to be critical in fine-tuning that LLM, that SLM that's breaking down your tasks so that it can do better for your use case. And so first it comes to standardization, then it comes to collecting this data and adding labels, whether yes, this was the right breakdown of tasks for the question at hand or the task at hand. And then once you start collecting that, you're able to either fine-tune or train your own model to break that out, and that seems like it'll be very powerful in the future. You
could optimize everything that way, right? Like you can optimize which model you're using at every step, what the prompts are, like literally it reminds me of AutoML in some ways.
Maybe chain of thought v3, I don't know. But we're just about half an hour in, and so it's we have to wrap up. But I guess one last closing thought would be, what's exciting you for the future?
I think I'm excited about just how quickly things are moving in general, and it feels like we're just on the cusp of standardization that can help. I do want to add, I think evals as well needs to be standardized a little bit, where ideally my dream would be you set up an application, any kind of agent application, and you immediately start seeing metrics of how is this actually working for data, and then to your point, collecting data sets that I can then use to further optimize it, and almost like building workflows that put people on the right golden path instead of everybody having to discover that independently. So I'm just excited about the community actually working together to build this out. I'm gonna continue exploring, building out on MCP as well. Just it's a passion project of mine personally. And then also really importantly, how do you get people to trust these systems? I think evaluation is one very important way for the developer to trust that their system is good, but also the user to trust that this agent can be trusted with something very important for me. So that's me. But what about you? What excites you in the near future?
I am very excited on just seeing what the ripple effect of Deepseek is like. Does it actually change the power dynamics? I think the market reaction is one thing, but and I think it might be overblown, but what does happen when more of the companies are empowered to have these models, and how does that change a lot of things, where it feels like a lot of AI companies need to align towards what's OpenAI doing, how do we make sure that we're in line with what OpenAI is doing and what they're releasing, to now what are companies doing with their own high caliber model, and how do we align with that? And that will be a seismic shift. And that will have some interesting ripple effects, I think, across the industry. And so, I'm excited to see what happens. And I think
I like that cliffhanger. As you have to tune in next time to find out.
Well, we'll give you our opinions.
Awesome. All right.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the LM podcast, and stay tuned for additional episodes where we will break down the news and updates in the AI world. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and let us know what you think about the content, and let us know if there's anything you're interested to get our takes on.
Thank you.